Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob, and first of all I want to apologize for not having a video last week. It was just a crazy week, 2020, you know what I'm talking about here if you're living in current year. And that's no excuse, I still had days off. I should have been able to get something out, but I didn't. I kind of had a video I did, but I just didn't like the way it turned out. It was very math heavy and I didn't think it was very interesting or exciting. I might try to revisit the idea again later, and maybe I can just do more in editing to put stuff up on the screen and make it more clear. But for now, I'm just going to shelve that video. I'll probably come back to it at a different date, but I just didn't think it was very interesting. So anyways, in today's video, I kind of just wanted to talk about Warlocks in general. I didn't want to do a build video or anything like that. I've done a bunch, but I really like Warlocks. They're one of my favorite classes in 5th edition. Note, I'm not saying that they're one of the most powerful, I'm just saying they're one of my personal favorites. And I just kind of wanted to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly about the Warlock class, because there are a lot of faults with the Warlock as well. But I don't know, maybe something I say will just kind of spark some creative impulses in you, and if you're a dungeon master and you've got a Warlock in your game, maybe it'll give you some ideas on how to draw the best out of that player, or if you're playing, maybe it'll give you some ideas of what you want to do. But I wanted to start with the good, and there's a lot of good things about the Warlock. And to me, the first and probably the most important is that it has so much roleplay potential. Even though the Warlock is an arcane caster like a sorcerer or a wizard, they don't really roleplay like an arcane caster, if you know what I'm saying. They're more like a cleric, or like the dark mirror of a cleric. You're getting your power from some other entity, and you're getting it through this relationship that you have with them. But unlike a cleric, where you worship this deity and it grants you power, yours was like a bargain. And I think that figuring out the details, or at least a general idea of what that bargain was, can really help to make your character come alive and feel more interesting, and to give you a better sense of who you're actually trying to play here. Because it's really easy to just think, oh well, you're a Warlock, so you sold your soul for power. I think that's very appropriate if you're a Pact of the Fiend, but if you look at the Archfey, do they really care about people's souls? They don't really seem to. And what about the Great Old Ones? If you look at Lovecraft, which is clearly where the Great Old Ones are inspired by, they don't care about souls at all. In fact, a lot of times, they're not even aware that they even have mortal followers. Mortals are just like insects that they're barely even aware of. And people who follow the Great Old Ones, it's usually their own lust for power or their obsession with secret knowledge and stuff that causes them to pledge themselves to these beings. It's not that they, are tempted by these beings the same way that a fiend would. It's just that they are pursuing them. And I can't help but think that maybe there's a bit of this notice me senpai type of attitude, where you worship some being who doesn't even know you exist, and so you have to work harder and harder to try to get his attention. And if you do get his attention, maybe that's not a good thing. I don't think that Cthulhu noticing that you exist is necessarily a positive, even if you worship him. In fact, I would say that the Great Old Ones, where the fiends, you trade your soul for some sort of bargain, in many cases. You don't have to, but, generally speaking, I think the Great Old Ones is more like trading your sanity or even your humanity for power. And that's just a completely different dynamic, and it's a very interesting dynamic. But if you look at the Celestial, the fact is that you could worship some sort of Solar or other type of angel, or some sort of good aligned being of whatever sort. They list a bunch of them in the book. But you're not a cleric. So, your relationship with this being isn't as a worshiper or a servant. You're more like a business partner almost, you know what I mean? So I think that figuring out the nature of your pact can really help to decide what kind of a relationship you want with your patron. And the patron should really be almost like an extra NPC in the campaign. maybe you do worship the Archfey, and they want you to like further the cause of the Fae. Maybe they want you to like protect the wild or something. Kind of like if anybody's ever read Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, he becomes like this emissary of the green type of idea, where he's just trying to protect wildlife and wilderness and whatnot. But with the Archfey, you could be trying to further their interests, protect Fae kind or whatever, or make the world more Fae-like. And that could be a really interesting character to play. So I think that no matter what particular patron you choose, there's a lot of roleplay potential there. And I would really encourage players and to encourage dungeon masters who have Warlock players in their campaigns to at least give some thought as to what the nature of this pact is. And Xanatar's Guide to Everything has a lot of really good suggestions in it on the Warlock section, where it goes through like, what's your relationship like? Is it adversarial? Are you a servant? Or, like, are you more like just business partners? Is it just an arrangement? You give me power and I'll try to help you out kind of thing, and further your cause. And all those things are going to roleplay a lot differently. So I think that as far as really more than any class, except for maybe a cleric or a paladin, Warlock has this built-in mechanic that's going to help you be a better role player just by establishing and deciding for yourself what your patron is and what your relationship with them entails. And, maybe even the details of the pact. Like, I wouldn't be opposed to having one of my players actually write out the details of the pact on a piece of paper. And I think that would be an interesting thing for a game, So I really like that aspect of the Warlock. I also think that there's a lot of really unique aspects to Warlock that nobody else really has. Like, invocations are a great example. In fact, I think invocations are so good, I wish they had something similar for every class, to be honest. The idea that you can take just a wide selection of abilities and fit them into your character and pick and choose which ones you want, in addition to choosing a school of magic or choosing a domain for a cleric or whatever. All these classes have something like that, but so does the Warlock. You've got your patron and their abilities. You've also got your Pact of the Chain, Pact of the Blade, and Pact of the Book that you can choose from, which gives you even more customization. You've got the invocations on top of that. They are one of the most customizable character classes in the entire game. And that's before we even start talking about feats and stuff, which are available to everybody else as well. But they just have so much flexibility and potential. You can play a Pact of the Blade Warlock who feels completely different than a Pact of the Chain or a Pact of the Tome. And I really like that with one class, you have so many options. And I think that Pact of the Blade was probably not as strong as it could have been before Xanatar's, although I played one pre-Xanatar's and I thought it was great. But I did multi-class with Fighter, which helped to cover for a lot of the weaknesses. But I think that, and I'm not even saying that you have to take Hexblade. Like, I played Pact of the Fiend. I think all of them are very viable. I'm just saying that Xanatar's gave us things like Eldritch Smite. It gave us some more invocations besides that to help out. And, it's just a much better, fuller class now than it used to be. And I think that that's obviously all for the good. I also think that multi-classing with a Warlock is particularly strong. Number one, you use Charisma, which is shared with Paladins, who are a pretty good multi-class with Warlocks. Sorcerers, another good one. Bards, all of those multi-class very, very well with Warlock. They all use Charisma, and they're all very strong classes in their own right. So I think that there's really good synergy between them and some of these other classes as well, and I think that's a real strength. I think that Pact Magic I'm gonna list it as both a strength and as a weakness of the class, to be honest, because I think that Pact Magic, the way it works on its own, is actually kind of a weakness. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But if you multi-class it with other classes, then the ability to combine short rest slots and long rest slots becomes incredibly powerful. And I've talked about this in a bunch of my Warlock multiclassing videos with like paladins and sorcerers and bards and everybody else. But the idea that you can get some of your spell slots back on a short rest, but have more spell slots you can get back on a long rest, really helps the Warlock out. Because if you look at the Warlock tables, they have 2 spell slots that they can use per short rest up until level 11. And when you finally get a 3rd. That's not a lot of spells. Now, I realize that you're probably going to be using a lot of Eldritch Blast, or if you're a Blade Lock, you might be using a weapon a lot. So you don't really need to use spells for like your round-to-round typical type damage. But if you're in a tough fight, the Wizard has a truckload of spells by level 11 that he can just start burning through, and he can start dropping his high-level spell slots. The Warlock has 2 spell slots before level 11. You don't even have any Arcanum either until level 11. So you literally have those 2 spell slots, and yes, they're going to recharge on a short rest. But if you're in a big fight, like fighting the big main boss or whatever, sometimes having 2 spell slots just isn't a lot. What if you needed to use one of them for a counter spell or for something else like that? And you have basically nothing left, and this is why so often Eldritch Blast ends up being the weapon of choice for Warlocks, because you just don't have enough spell slots to go deep. But when you're multi-class with other people, now you've got a bunch of short rest spells, and you've got some long rest spell slots, and the ability to mix and match is very, very strong. So those are my thoughts on the good. Oh, and I should mention Eldritch Blast, of course. Eldritch Blast, on its own, with no invocations at all, is a pretty decent cantrip. I actually prefer it slightly over, like, say, Firebolt, just because Firebolt is so hit or miss. If you hit, you do lots of damage at higher levels, right? You could be doing 4 out of 10, but if you miss, you did nothing. Eldritch Blast, you have 4 bolts, each doing 1 die 10, which means that something's probably going to be able to hit, your damage is probably going to be a little more consistent, and you can split damage between multiple targets. So if you have, one guy who's almost dead, you can be like, okay, I'm going to hit that guy with a blast or 2, try to finish him off, and then I'm going to start on this other guy. And you can't really do that with a Firebolt. It's just one shot, and, you might overkill the guy by 30 points. That just happens. With Eldritch Blast, you've got a lot more flexibility. But once you start adding the invocations, you can start doubling up the range. You can add a pull, you can add a knockback, you can almost double the damage. So these kind of things just make it so much more versatile and so much more powerful. And at low levels, you don't have a ton of invocations, but at high levels, you have a lot. So even like I've played Path to the Blade Warlocks who still take Eldritch Blast and add like Agonizing Blast, Grasp of the Air, and maybe Repelling Blast, just because you've got, if I have 8 or 9 invocations to choose from, using 2 or 3 on Eldritch Blast isn't such a big deal. Yeah, I'm probably going to have my extra attack invocation, and I'm going to have like Life Drinker as an invocation, but those are like the only ones I specifically need. I might have a couple others here and there, like maybe I take Devil's Sight or something like that, but point is, you've got a lot of options now. And for a Blaster Warlock, there's really no reason not to have 2 or 3 at least that are going to improve the damage in Eldritch Blast. And the fact that Eldritch Blast frees you up from having to take a lot of other damage spells means that even though you don't have a lot of spells known, you don't have to not waste, but you don't have to use those spell selections on DPS. I mean, you might want like 1 or 2 AoEs. I'm not saying don't take Fireball. If you went Pact to the Fiend, Fireball's still great. You might want to take that, just so you have a good AoE attack. But there's no point taking like Scorching Ray if you have Eldritch Blast. There's no point taking really any single target damage attacks. So now let's get into the bad. And as much as I just talked about Eldritch Blast is also kind of one of the bad. Because the truth is that Eldritch Blast is so good that it really overshines a lot of the other options. And to me, that's just kind of a poor design. And I don't want to say that Eldritch Blast is too good, although it probably is. But it's also that a lot of the other options are just clearly weaker. And this is one of the big complaints that people used to have about the Pact to the Blade, especially, is that it took a lot of work to make a blade lock that was going to be just as good as a Warlock who took Eldritch Blast, Agonizing, and maybe say Repelling Blast or Eldritch Spear. And that took like no work. You're going to get those invocations anyway. You know, you've got 2 of them at level 2. You can take Eldritch, Agonizing and let's say Repelling Blast. And your character is pretty much good to go. At level 5, you're going to get another bolt. At level 11, you're going to get a third. At 17, you're going to get a fourth. And then you can just take whatever else. And it doesn't really even matter at that point. Your main damage source is just going to be Eldritch Blast. Whereas with the Path to the Blade Warlock, you're making a couple attacks around, and that's it. And sure, you can take things like, say, Pole-Arm Mastery, so you can get a bonus action attack, and then stack Great Weapon Mastery on top of that, since Pole-Arms are also a great weapon. And now you can get all that extra damage. But, I mean, the Blaster Lot can just cast Hex as a bonus action, and now he's getting all that damage added on. And sure, the Blade Lot can use Hex as well, but that's going to require your bonus action. And if you're using that bonus action for a Pole-Arm attack, you don't have that bonus action available for Hex. And, you could, like, use Hex the first round and use the butt end of your Pole-Arm the next, but if the creature you die, or target dies, and you have to move your Hex, now you're not using that. Maybe use a Great Sword instead of a Pole-Arm. But the point is that it takes a lot more work, you're looking at a lot of feats, and it's just so much more effort to get to that same level that the other Warlock already has. Now, I really think that Eldritch Smite was just what changed things for Path to the Blade Warlocks. The fact that you could just basically be a paladin, but be a warlock instead, really changes that entire dynamic. Because now you can drop some big spell slots as smites, do a bunch of damage, and knock guys prone even, and knock them back. So you've got that control aspect that the Blaster Warlocks had. You've got the damage that they have, maybe even bigger, because you can still add a bunch of the other stuff that I just mentioned, like feats and whatnot, on top of that. And you've got the option of also wearing medium armor, or if you multi-classed, maybe even heavy armor. So I think that it's in a better position now than it was, say, when the game first released. But Eldritch Blast also kind of overshadows all your other damage spells. And like I said, Fireball's still good, Things like Hunger of Hadar. I'm not really using it for the damage as much as I am for battlefield control. I'm blocking a part of the battlefield and throwing up this magical darkness. And the fact that my magical darkness is actually going to do a bit of damage on top of that is actually just a bonus to me. It's like darkness, but better, except it's also one higher level. But, whatever. So I do think that as much as I love Eldritch Blast, a lot of the other options are just so much weaker. Like if I look at something like, say, Cloak of Flies, and I want to have some AoE damage, the fact that it's based on my Charisma modifier is pretty good at low levels. But it's not really scaling. If I have 20 Charisma, and I'm like level 8, for example, then doing 5 AoE damage to everything near me, just passively for free, isn't bad. Doing 5 AoE damage when I'm level 18 is almost nothing. I'm fighting stuff with 300 hit points often, 400 hit points maybe, and doing 5 damage a round, just, it's just not a very good ability at that level. And I think that a lot of Warlock stuff kind of falls into that point where you're like, well, I could take Cloak of Flies, or I could take Agonizing Blast. Like, that's just a no-brainer to me. So I think just mechanically, it's just not that well designed. The other thing is that Pact of the Chain, which is one of my favorite packs, just doesn't scale well either. And again, it's kind of poor design. And the Beastmaster Ranger has the same problem. It's that you have this cool summoned creature, this companion that it is really, really powerful at low levels when you first get it. But that imp, or Quasit, or Pseudo-Dragon, or whatever you took, Sprite, whatever, at level 3, when you first got that pact, is the same one you have at level 20. And, like, a 10 hit point imp at level 3 isn't horrible. He might even survive a hit or two, I mean, it's possible. He could get hit by a goblin. They're doing like 1d6 plus 2 on average, He's probably going to be okay from a couple of hits, maybe even. But by level, 15, 18, 19, 20, I mean, he's just going to get killed from anything, and that really reduces his usefulness. And, whereas the Pact of the Tome, you're just adding more and more rituals to your spell book from any class. You're getting higher level rituals that you can use. The more stuff you're able to add to that pact, the stronger it becomes. But Pact of the Chain hasn't changed at all since you were level 3. And I'm not saying that some of the invocations for it aren't great, like Chains of Kokari, or however it's pronounced, is an amazing, amazing ability. It's one of those ones where you look at it in the book and you're like, I don't know how often I'd ever use that. And by the time you're level 15 and you take it and you start using it on fiends and stuff constantly, you're like, this ability is insane. So I'm not saying that there aren't some good things in the Pact for high level characters. There certainly are. But the main core of getting this companion with you, it doesn't upgrade, it doesn't scale, and I just find it kind of weak. So the other bad that I wanted to mention, the last one on the list, is of course the path magic, and I just talked about that a bit, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. You kind of already heard my thoughts on it. You don't have a lot of slots, and it's fine if you're fight, short rest, fight, short rest, fight, long rest next day, and you're able to use those spell slots a lot, recharge them whenever you kind of feel like it, and keep going. Then it's excellent. If you're getting 2 or 3 encounters and a short rest constantly, then it's going to be okay. The problem is when you don't have access to lots of short rests, and sometimes that's just the way it is. The other problem with pact magic that I haven't mentioned yet is the fact that your spell slots automatically scale. If we take my favorite example, of course, being shield. Let's say you go with the Hexblade. Shield is an amazing spell at level 1. Things like absorb elements are amazing spells at low levels, and they're great as level 1 spells, but they're not great when you're using a 5th level spell slot to do it, because there's no added benefit from it. And so the fact that your spell slots automatically scale is actually kind of a limitation. Like a wizard, if they have access to 5th level spell slots, they can choose to scale up those 1st and 2nd and 3rd and 4th level spell slots to their higher level spell slots. They can also choose not to. So if he wants to use shield, he can just use a 1st level spell slot for it. If he's out of 1sts, he can be like, okay, I guess I'll use a 2nd. But he doesn't have to use his 5th. He doesn't have to use a 4th, right? He's got those other spell slots that he can use for the higher level spells. You don't. If you want to use shield and you've only got pact magic, you're using shield at your highest available spell slot. And that's just, it's just a lot more limiting than what wizards and sorcerers and clerics all have. And, it's just a fact of life. So that's why I say that I really like it in combination with multi-classing, where now I get that flexibility. I could multi-class a paladin and use those spell slots for shield, but use my pact magic for smites, which are going to come back on a short rest anyways. And you turn what's actually a weakness of the class into a strength by taking the best elements of the wizard, where you can choose what spell slots you want to use, but then still having the pact magic slots that are recharging on a short rest. So that's my ideas for the bad. And finally, we get to the ugly. And kind of hurts me to say this because I love Warlocks so much. But the real thing that I wanted to talk about here in this section is why play a Warlock from 1 to 20. And I'm not saying that you can't. I'm not saying they're not good. In fact, in the first campaign I ran, the party, we got to level 18, so we didn't quite get the 20. I've always wanted to make a follow-up and go back just so we can cap things off. But we've had my other campaign that I just finished running a couple days ago, actually. The players were 20. We had a different campaign that reached 20 that I was a player in. I did not DM that one. But we've had several high-level campaigns now. I mean, we play every week religiously, pretty much. I mean, situation lately has kind of put a crimp into our gaming schedule, obviously, since we can't really get together and play. And now, we're forced to use Discord and stuff like that. But the fact is that we've had multiple characters with high-level characters and multiple campaigns that reached that. And we had an 18th level Warlock in that campaign I ran. And so he just went Warlock all the way from 1 to 18. My problems with Warlock aren't that it's not good as a solo leveling class. It's that I don't really see how multi-classing would ever be a drawback on a Warlock. I think you're almost always going to be better off multi-classing with someone else, with a different class. Your capstone ability is not really all that good, to be honest. I mean, I'm not saying it's the worst in the game, but, you know, the ability to recharge your spell slots, while nice, I mean, they were coming back on a short rest anyways. I kind of feel like if you had time to use that ability, you probably had time for a short rest. And I'm not saying that it'll never be useful, but I mean, if you look at compared to say like the Barbarian capstone, the Barbarian capstone is not very exciting. It's not very sexy. It's just that passive bonus, which is just not necessarily fun. But I don't think anyone would deny that plus 40 your strength and con and raising the caps for both of those stats is not an incredible ability. And so while it's not necessarily fun to use because it's just passively there, that ability is there for every single time you roll the dice. And every time you get hit, those extra hit points from that plus 40 your con are having an effect on the game. And if you're raging, then you're getting even double the mileage out of those extra hit points. So while the ability might not be fun or sexy, it is incredibly effective. And I kind of feel like the Warlock one is neither. It's occasionally effective, but it's not really fun to use either. It's not like, oh man, I can't wait to recharge some pack magic slots, which I could have done on a short rest anyways, right? Like it's not an engaging, fun ability, and it's also not really very powerful. So the capstone kind of sucks. The other thing is, and I've seen people joke about this on the internet, I remember reading somebody's Warlock guide, and the first thing he says is, now, I know many of you are probably wondering, why do I need a guide for a class that I'm only going to take 2 levels in? And sadly, that's kind of true. Look at how many videos I've made with people, you know, where I talk about like 2 levels of Warlock and going the rest Sorcerer, or going the rest Bard, or maybe 3 levels if you wanted to choose like Pact of the Tome or something and get some ritual casting. But the point is, Eldritch Blast is going to scale with your character level, not your Warlock level. So a level 18 Sorcerer, level 2 Warlock is going to be able to do just as much damage with their Eldritch Blast as a level 20 Warlock is, even though you've only got the 2 levels of Warlock. Worse yet, the Sorcerer can quicken cast an Eldritch Blast, and he can drop, well, 8 bolts in a round. And he can do that a lot, because it's only a cantrip, and you can change spell slots into sorcery points. So if you start getting low, you can be like, hey, I don't need all these first level spells or second level spells, because I'm just using them all for converting into sorcery points anyway, so I can keep quick and blasting more Eldritch Blasts. And I just kind of feel like it's one of those things where, especially amongst the caster Warlocks, there's just not a lot of big rewards for leveling up higher. Your spell selection is way worse than, say, like, well, obviously it's worse than a wizard or a bard, because bard's getting magical secrets. It's worse than a sorcerer, I would say. And especially at high levels, you're only getting 1 Mystic Arcanum. So you have 1 6th level spell, 1 7th, 1 8th, 1 9th. And that's the only one of that level that you get to choose. And that's the only one you're ever going to have. So you're really, really limited, not just with your patch slots and how many spell slots you can drop in a big fight, but just how many spell slots you have, period. And like, I'd rather just probably go Sorcerer with my Warlock and have the flexibility to choose from multiple different spell slots and multiple different spells. And, you know, you also have a slightly better spell list. I mean, Warlock doesn't have access to Wish. You have a couple other nice spells, but, you know, Sorcerer does. And, I mean, Wizard has an even better spell slot, or a better spell list, but then you're looking at Int versus Charisma, so it's probably not going to be your best choice. But, I mean, Bard, you've got Mystic Arcanum, you can add, you know, 2 spells of anything. If you took 2 levels of Warlock, 18 levels of Bard is still going to give you your Mystic Arcanums. You could grab Wish then if you wanted, or, you know, whatever other spell you wanted. Prismatic Wall, whatever. Prismatic Wall played a major role in the conclusion of my campaign when the Bard used that, and the barbarian dragged the main villain through the prismatic wall, it did a truckload of damage. Sorry, losing my voice. It's not the Voldemort disease. It's not the disease that cannot be named. So that's usually a good indication I've talked too much and I need to start wrapping things up. But anyways, those are my main thoughts on the Warlock. And overall, I really love the class. Like I said, it's probably my favorite 5th edition class. I think it's fun. I think the roleplay potential is amazing. I've played 3 different Warlocks now, although one of them died at level 1 in a total party kill, so I don't really count him too much. But I have played 2 others. In fact, the one I played in 2 different campaigns, because the DM who ran the first one ran a follow-up campaign. So I have really enjoyed Warlock as a class. I think the roleplay potential is amazing. I think that they're great for multiclassing, and if you're like me and you enjoy multiclassing, then Warlock is a standout choice. It's one of the best choices in the game for that. But there are weaknesses to the class. There are mechanical designs that I just don't think are necessarily the best. And they're not debilitating, crippling things that you can't overcome. You'll still enjoy playing it, I think, if you're that type of player and you like playing casters in general. But just be aware that, you know, just like anything else, there's strengths, there's weaknesses, and then there's just flaws entirely, which are a different category in my opinion. So anyways, those are my thoughts on the Warlock. I plan to make some more videos on some of the other classes as well, and just talk about just kind of more the philosophy of the class and how I like to see them played, or what my opinions are on them. But again, these are just my opinions, so feel free to agree, disagree, you know, whatever, it's fine. Please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, all that stuff. And most importantly, as I always say, leave your comments in the comment section. Tell me your thoughts on the Warlock. Tell me if you agree or disagree. Maybe just, you know, share your own experiences. Like, hey, I played a Warlock in this campaign, and, you know, this is what I chose, and it was awesome. Or I didn't like it. I felt it was, like, really weak in this area. I don't know what I could have done. Whatever. And, you know, me or other people that are subscribed here can give you their thoughts on it. Maybe help you out. So, anyways, that's the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.